Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 163 based on novel. So let's start. Young Master Yu surveyed the surroundings and smiled. He still managed to escape. It's no wonder. Back when I led everyone to chase after Naikue, he also interfered and let Naikue escape. That was in Great Ruins and not West Earth, so I couldn't be reckless. Now that we're in my land, it's slightly childish if he still thinks he can escape from my grasp. The youth was none other than Yu Buchuan, who had chased after Xiongxiu and her daughter. He was the son of the palace master of True Heaven Palace, and even though he was young, his methods were ruthless, and he was deceitful in many ways. Xiongxiu had been the palace master of True Heaven Palace, until she was overthrown by Yu family. Yu Buchuan's cultivation wasn't considered great, but he could lead a crowd to chase after her, who was a cult master level existence, and nearly sent her to death after killing the strong practitioners beside her one by one. It showed Yu Buchuan's abilities. His schemes were deep and extraordinary. Yu Buchuan gently nodded, and a female of True Heaven Palace flew up to execute her divine art. Suddenly, the white clouds in the sky wiggled and transformed into an arrow shape that pointed downward. The carriage drove into the forest below, and another woman stomped her foot. Numerous rocks started to roll together, and formed a rock giant which pointed in the direction Qin Mu had left while saying, "The person riding a huge beast went that way." The woman then dispersed her divine art, and the stone giant crumbled back into a pile of rocks. Phoenixes pulled the carriage forward while Yu Buchuan sat in it with a smile. In West Earth, no one can escape the tracking of our True Heaven Palace. The previous Naikue couldn't, and it's even more impossible for this cult master Qin. Young Master, this time it was the Grandmaster of the Golden Palace who came to inform us, asking Elder Bai of our True Heaven Palace to arrest this cult master Qin. A woman of True Heaven Palace smiled in a charming way. Elder Bai and the Grandmaster of the Golden Palace have old ties, so ordering the arrest was expected. That Grandmaster borrowed the power of our True Heaven Palace to get rid of a strong enemy, so he will owe a favor to our True Heaven Palace. But why is Young Master helping him personally? Yu Buchuan smiled. I'm not helping Grandmaster, instead, I'm meeting Cult Master Qin. I had suffered a loss under his hand the previous time, and let him snatch Green Dragon Bead away, which is a precious treasure. Since he dared to barge into our West Earth again, I naturally have to teach him a lesson. Besides, coming to West Earth this time, he must have ill intentions. I suspect his motive isn't just simply touring around. Since he saved the previous Naikue and the little princess, I'm afraid he is going to try to help her snatch back the seat of the princess. With him around, Naikue is definitely not too far away. His gaze became cold and he said indifferently, even though my mother has become the master of True Heaven Palace, as long as she doesn't give birth to a little princess, her seat of palace master won't be firm. Naikue's motive for coming back is nothing unexpected. However, this cult master Qin and the previous Naikue will never expect how great my strength can be. He raised his head to look in the direction in which Qin Mu had left and said coldly, "Let me give them a big surprise." The dragon Qilin sprinted among the mountains, as though he was flying and passed numerous mountainous ridges. His speed was inferior to before, but it was still considered fast. Qin Mu surveyed the surroundings and frowned slightly. The terrain here was slightly different from the topology on West Earth's geographic map that Ku had given him. The divine arts practitioners of West Earth like to fight around with mountains, and I reckon they don't place them back after fighting. Using the terrain to determine my location is not a certain thing. I still require the astronomical observations. He raised his head and formation markings swirled in his eyes. He raised his head up to look at the sky, and the stars and constellations that were blocked by the sunlight gradually appeared. He determined his location, and let out a sigh of relief before smiling. We have already passed Bamboo City. When he said that, rumbling suddenly came from the front, and Qin Mu frowned slightly. He raised his head to look ahead, and saw dust permeating the sky, transforming into fog to shroud the mountain ranges. He couldn't see what had caused the world-shaking movements in front. The dragon Qin also immediately stopped in his footsteps and looked nervously ahead. The dust became denser and denser as it rolled forward, swallowing forests and mountains. Cult Master, what's that? The dragon Qin gave an astonished cry. The ground was trembling continuously, and the trees around them were also shaking. The rocks were jumping up and down on the ground like there was an earthquake. However, it wasn't what was happening. Qin Mu opened Cinnabar Heaven's eyes and looked at the dust surging forward, and his eyes went wide in disbelief. There is a city in the dust. A city? The dragon Qin asked in bewilderment. How can a city create such a big commotion? Because this city is currently running through the forest. Qin Mu's scalp almost exploded from his surprise, and he said sternly, "That city is running toward us. Fatty dragon, let's go." The dust surged forth, and a magnificent city entered their eyes. It was running straight at them. Below the city walls that were over numerous yards tall were incomparably thick legs. Behind the wall, huge houses had already become giants overflowing with murderous intent. Some were beating drums while others were carrying huge treasures. The gates of the city in the meantime opened, and razor-sharp teeth grew out from them as well as the city walls. They opened and closed continuously, and everything that passed through them was chewed into bits and pieces, including mountain peaks. All that couldn't be chewed into bits and pieces entered the city, and was smashed into smithereens by the monster-like giants in the city. The city kept on sprinting toward them, and on its gates, there were 2 words, Bamboo City. The divine arts practitioners of West Earth had actually awakened an entire city. The dragon Qin immediately turned and ran while shouting in exasperation, "The divine arts practitioners of West Earth are crazy. Cult Master, they must be crazy. Who awakens an entire city and use it as a weapon?" Behind them, everything Bamboo City passed over was razed to flat ground. The big city was like a fresh life form taking big strides to chase them. It flipped over the mountain ridges at an extremely fast speed. Everything it passed over was flattened. The city was like a terrifying mouth that could swallow and crush everything. Not only that, the thousands of giants in the city swung their bodies like huge hammers, and all that couldn't be chewed into bits and pieces by the city was smashed into smithereens by the giants. On top of that, behind the city was a rolling dust cloud of all the things that had been broken down into pieces. The dust spread in 100 miles radius, obscuring everything in sight. The city swallowed with its front and spat out what was left behind itself. One could well imagine what the consequences would be like if they were to be caught up in its mouth. Qin Mu hurried non-stop, and the dragon Qin was putting his utmost effort into sprinting. At that moment though, a huge river suddenly lashed out from within Bamboo City like a long whip. The dragon Qin immediately dodged, but the huge river was extremely nimble. It moved right and left, forcing the dragon Qin to dodge in all directions. His speed decreased, and Bamboo City gradually caught up with him. "Big brother." Xiong Qia's voice was trembling when she looked back in fear. The ground trembled and stones that were the height of humans were thrown mid-air. Bamboo City opened its gate wide and started crunching with sharp teeth in preparation. "No worries, Sister Qia, don't be afraid." Qin Mu turned around and his sword pellet floated into the air, moving in front of his body. The dragon Qin had been forced by the huge river to dodge right and left, and if it continued, they would soon be swallowed by Bamboo City. Who is blocking us? Qin Mu looked at the approaching thing. The city gate and wall constantly moved up and down, making the thick and sharp spears look like teeth. It sowed doubt in the youth's heart. Is there a need to have such a grand parade to kill a divine arts practitioners of Six Directions realm? Pangong Tso's with his relations shouldn't have been able to mobilize such a huge treasure like Bamboo City. So who is it that wants to get rid of me? He suddenly thought of a person and smiled while muttered to himself. It must be him. The young master of True Heaven Palace. His prey was snatched right under his eyes when I saved Xiongxiu and her daughter, so he and I can be considered as old friends. Is he planning to give me an unexpected surprise? At that moment, the dragon Qilin howled. Cult Master, this definitely isn't a surprise. This is a shock. Crap. Another huge river lashed out from the mouth of Bamboo City and wrapped itself around Dragon Qilin's tail before pulling him toward the huge mouth. The Dragon Qilin clawed furiously with his 4 feet, but he still couldn't prevent himself from being dragged closer to his doom. Fatty dragon, cut off your tail like a brave warrior. Xiongxia said with a solemn face and clear voice. Tears flew down Dragon Qilin's cheeks. Sister Chia, we won't be able to escape even if I cut off my tail, so let me die with an intact corpse. Although I don't think that's possible either. The gate was like a huge mouth, opening and closing, crunching on anything that came close. Whatever survived it went through the giants transformed from buildings that were smashing around as they wished, so preserving an intact corpse was something nearly impossible. Cold light flashed on every spear tip, which was as thick as the opening of a bottle. They were like iron bars on top of the city wall. The tips were sharp as swords while the flat sides were filled with strange markings. It was obvious that every spear was a spirit weapon. If one got next to the gates, it would be equivalent to dozens of spirit weapons piercing through their corporeal body and leaving dozens of bowl-sized blood holes in the body. Combining that with the explosive power of the city gate and wall opening and closing, one would most likely become a bloody mess instantly. Still in a daze, Qin Mu said, as expected of the young master of True Heaven Palace. But he shouldn't have the ability to awaken Bamboo City's spirit, right? His cultivation may be higher than mine, but is at most on 7 stars realm. Cult Master. The Dragon Qilin was still being dragged toward the mouth of Bamboo City. Qin Mu shook off his surprise. His sword pellets suddenly burst forth, and countless sword lights flew out. The 8,000 swords executed wave sword form at the same time. It was an incomparably majestic sight. With treasure swords like clouds circling past the sharp spears of the city, countless teeth of Bamboo City's mouth were instantly sliced apart. The city gate still chomped down heavily, and just with its astonishing biting strength was able to squash the art into a pulp. Qin Mu stretched out his hand to grab his sword. He might not be able to unleash Carefree Sword's divine power, but its sharpness alone could allow him to slice everything apart. Carefree Sword lit up in his hands. Threading the vast movements, yin and yang come and go within 2 modes. The power from the first form of Dao Sword exploded, and the sword light separated in black and white as yin and yang stirred up, swirling around each other to form the shape of Taiji. However, it was just the vision caused by the sword skill. The sword skill was actually executing extremely high algebra attainments. What formed every dot and every line of the Taiji diagram had gone through incomparably detailed calculations, and the movement of every sword light contained incomparably complicated algebra calculations. It was the marvel of Dao sect explaining the universe. Bamboo City bit down on it forcefully, and a section of the city wall vanished with the sword light that had black and white replacing each other. Qin Mu rose into the sky and raised Carefree Sword above himself. He used his magic power to hold the sword back as 8,000 swords flew back, overlapping with it. With the child swords fusing into the mother sword, the 8,000 swords combined into one, and Qin Mu instantly felt the sword in his hand becoming incomparably heavy. It was the second form of his sword pellet. It had two forms. One was the pellet, and the other was the fusion with the mother sword. The weight after fusing made Carefree sword so heavy that he could no longer use magic power to execute any power of this sword. Qin Mu raised this sword even high, and at that moment, he could only do one move. Hack! Hacking forward. In front of him, behind the dragon chelines, was Bamboo City. It had already dragged them past its mouth, and was then pulling the dragon cheline to the street. On both sides of it, the giants of awakened buildings were lined up in preparation to smash them into meat paste. In the center of Bamboo City, even magnificent palaces had stood up. They weren't made out of wood or stone, but had been meticulously constructed from black gold, black iron, and black copper. The divine arts practitioners of West Earth didn't seek to be strong themselves. They borrowed power from the heaven and earth and changed nature itself, gathering black gold and black copper to forge their spirit weapons. The better spirit weapons were forged, the stronger they would be when they awakened. The palaces in Bamboo City were spirit weapons forged by the strongest divine arts practitioners, so their power was on an entirely different league when compared to the wooden and stone houses. The palace giants had stood up to block the end of the street, and were overflowing with murderous intent. Such a sight was never before seen or heard. Qin Mu hacked down with this sword, and the tremor that came out from the incomparably heavy Carefree sword immediately shattered the huge river, which had coiled around the dragon cheline's tail. It was like a huge snake whose tail got severed, and it twisted about, wiggling around in the city. When the sword tip of Carefree sword touched the street, its incomparably terrifying strength exploded, and the limestone slabs on the street overturned one after another while rising up into midair. An astonishing crack appeared on the street, and it exploded and frantically spread forward. More limestone slabs were flipped up and exploded into pieces in midair. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Flying swords flew out from the tip of Carefree sword, and Qin Mu's violent vital chi surged into them. They swirled and slashed all around the street. With 8,000 flying swords slicing and cutting everything in their way, everywhere they passed, the giants were left in pieces. When 8,000 swords combined into one, Qin Mu couldn't execute the power of each and every one of them, but when they separated, he could instantly do so. Countless sword lights were circling in wheel-like motion, while rushing toward the end of the street among pieces of wood and stone. In an instant, they cut deeply into the palace giants and pierced them. Qin Mu's arms were trembling, for the sword had nearly torn apart all of his muscles. Nearly all of his bones had shattered, and his tendons had nearly snapped. His magic power was also already half depleted. The reason why he had used the first form of Dao sword and not the first form of sword picture, when Bamboo City was about to swallow them, was because he wanted to save magic power. The amount required by sword treading mountains and rivers was much higher. Yet his slashing motion had instantly depleted close to half of his magic power. However, the result was also brilliant. He raised an entire street with just one slash. He had never expected he could achieve such a powerful force of destruction. Qin Mu let go of Carefree sword and used his remaining vital chi. Carefree sword trembled, and the other flying swords flew over from the end of the street. This time, Qin Mu didn't dare to use the second form of the sword pellet. Instead, he collected the 8,000 swords into a circular metal ball. He opened his Dao Tai sack and put the sword pellet away. He then went into a daze again. I seem to have found a basic sword form that is unprecedented. This sword move isn't in the 17 basic sword moves. The move with which he had slashed downwards earlier had caused countless swords to spin like a wheel as they swooshed out from Carefree sword with about half of his magic power in an instant. This kind of sword form that spun like a wheel was different from all of the 17 basic sword forms. The most similar one to it was wave sword form, but that one was using the wrist to draw out a circle with the tip of the sword. The sword form that Qin Mu had unintentionally executed, however, could spin like a wheel, and had the power of hacking, the technique of pair, and the agility of wave. This was the 18th basic sword form. Within Bamboo City, wooden giants were rushing over, and at the end of the street, the tattered palace giants were raising their circular and yellowish palaces as hammers to smash them against the intruders. The huge rivers in the city surged forth and gathered together, transforming into a huge giant with a water dragon coiled around it. Raising its fists, it came with fists raised as well. Qin Mu was in a daze again. It's just that this basic sword form seems to be too crazy in regards to consumption of magic power. Not only that, it also seems to require a lot of money, for only with plenty of money can one forge these many flying swords. The most crucial point is that the flying swords need to have tips on both ends to maximize the power even more. The dragon Qin roared fiercely and spewed fire from its mouth. The flame pillars set the street of Bamboo City ablaze, and the wooden giants began to burn. The water giant hurriedly extinguished the fire everywhere, and the water fizzled from the heat. This led to the water giant shrinking down. Qin Mu remained in a daze. But come to think of it, what I have is money. The dragon Qin grew merciless. He spewed fire in all directions and set the whole city ablaze. He had been chased until he had no place to escape and was dragged into the city, so now his power doubled when paying back his oppressor. Suddenly, Bamboo City gave a strong jerk and became motionless. The house giants, building giants, and palace giants also ceased moving instantly, returning to the ground and transforming back into buildings and palaces. The water giant also collapsed back into the river, becoming running water. Bamboo City quieted down instantly. In the messy street, only Qin Mu, Xiong Chia, and the dragon Qin were left. The dragon Qin looked around with nervousness, afraid that the buildings, houses, and palaces would revive once again. But Bamboo City was silent, with no other people to be seen in the whole place. Bamboo City should have been a big city, with over 100,000 people, but all of them seemed to have vanished without a trace. To make an entire city leave their homes, a person had to possess unimaginable authority. Bamboo City was empty, but for Qin Mu and his group. The city that was more than lively earlier seemed to have suddenly died. But the quieter it was, the more terrifying it felt. Suddenly, the entire city started to tremble violently, and the ground under their feet rose up. The buildings, houses, and palaces sunk downward, and Bamboo City instantly turned into a piece of empty land. The dragon Qin hurriedly rose into the sky while stepping on fire clouds. Xiong Chia held tightly onto his man'er, looking nervously downward. The city below suddenly split apart, and square stones started to rise from the ground. They overlapped layer by layer to form a square-shaped obelisk, which rose up extremely quickly. Within the time span of a breath, a forest of square pillars appeared around Qin Mu and his group. They seemed incomparably small when compared to their surroundings. The pillars were actually moving rapidly, but the changes in formation were hidden. Every time the pillars moved, they would either increase in height or shrink. The square stones would automatically move horizontally or upwards, entering other pillars. There were also some horizontal pillars, which hung on the other pillars like beams. Yet the length of those beams was also constantly changing, sometimes increasing and sometimes decreasing. There were clearly roads in front of the group, but the next instant the stone pillars would join together and become an incomparably thick wall. Bamboo City seemed to have revived once again, but it was completely different from the moving city that could swallow all things. Now it was like a three-dimensional space that was constantly changing. Before, Bamboo City had been a huge object that could swallow everything and looked to be extremely dangerous, but it was all bark and no bite, posing no strong threat. However, after it had become three-dimensional and began to operate with the pattern of formations, its threat level had risen drastically. The 6 sides of the squares were imprinted with different rune markings. Even with the shifting and reassembly of the stones, the runes always connected perfectly with the ones in their surroundings. It was the strangest point. The reassembly of the stones was only the outer appearance, while the true danger lay in the runes that were constantly splitting up and merging back. Different patterns created with the runes meant different formations. There were countless stones in the city and the runes on the stones were different from each other. So there were countless methods to merge them, and the changes in the formation were boundless. Qin Mu immediately saw through it. If they stood still instead of moving, they wouldn't activate the power of the formation, but if they moved the least bit, the power of the formation would be activated. Divine arts of West Earth are incomparably magnificent. Qin Mu exclaimed in admiration to himself. The divine arts of West Earth might not put importance on power like those of Eternal Peace Empire, but their strangeness and wildness made him admire them deeply. He had learned 10,000 spirit nature technique, but he had never put an effort in exploring it. Now, however, Bamboo City had shown him the wisdom of countless divine arts practitioners of West Earth. The free space became smaller and smaller. It was continuously being compressed, and if the city continued like that, it was probably going to become a huge three-dimensional cube. If Qin Mu, Xiong'er, and the dragon Qilin didn't manage to get out, they would naturally be squashed within it. The dragon Qilin could also see the terrifying points of Bamboo City, and immediately began to calculate a path to survival. Since they were facing a formation, there had to be a certain execution process, and within it lay their chance for survival. The transformation of Bamboo City relied on the shifting of stones, so it was where the group's only chance rested. However, it was incomparably difficult to solve the formation. The paths that looked like they would lead to escape soon showed up to be dead ends. If the group had taken them, what awaited them would only be miserable death. The cubic cage of Bamboo City contains an extremely complicated algebra transformation. The dragon Qilin looked around and his eyeballs continuously rotated like a lantern, with a carousel of paper horses, while he tried to calculate the movement of all the cubes in the huge formation. He soon started to foam at the mouth from exhaustion, though. He quickly said, "If I was given enough time, I could calculate a path to survival. However, I'm afraid that before I calculate it, we will be squashed to death. Cult Master, do you have any method to calculate a way out?" Qin Mu's eyes flickered, and he said in delight, "I suddenly thought of an idea to deal with Xing'an. If spirits could wake up in his limbs, wouldn't they go out of control? That would make it much easier to kill him." The dragon Qilin was flustered and exasperated. "Cult Master, we are about to die, but you still have time to think of this." Qin Mu smiled. "The person controlling Bamboo City has extremely high attainments in algebra and is not inferior to me. If it was a fair fight, I could still defeat him. However, since they schemed against me and took the first move when an opportunity arose, it's very hard for me to solve their formation. By the time I would do it, we would have already been squashed to death." The dragon Qilin despaired, but Qin Mu didn't seem to share his feelings. He suddenly shouted out, "Senior brother Yu, long time no see. Don't you want to chat with me before I die?" "I don't. I'm scared I will die if I talk too much." Qin Mu could not tell from where Yu Buchuan's voice was coming, but it sounded quite delighted. When dealing with a person like Cult Master Qin, it's best if you die as soon as possible. I can't risk you dying a moment later. Only dead Cult Master Qin is Cult Master Qin that people can trust. Qin Mu's face turned black like charcoal. "But Brother Qin can be at ease. If I meet your corpse, I will definitely sit down and tell you about myself." Yu Buchuan laughed happily. "Little brother, I have a bad habit. and that's trying my best to get rid of the opponent when I fight them. Only when the opponent dies do I become talkative, and have a good chat with their corpse, telling them the reason why they lost to me. I won't make an exemption for Cult Master Qin. Qin Mu sighed ruefully. What a good habit. I'm trapped here and am destined to die under your hand, yet you are still so careful. Truly a wonderful opponent. So this is called meeting your match. I want to do a painting for you in consideration of our friendship that started with appreciating each other's talents. The movements of the stone walls became more and more concentrated, and the cubic cage formed by Bamboo City was also changing extremely fast. Every move contained profound mathematical structure. They became formation structures, and the stone cubes that no longer moved on the outer layer had already become a killing formation, trapping those inside. Slowly, the stone cubes in the inner layers also started to stop moving, becoming killing formations as well. As one layer wrapped around another, it became more and more unlikely that the trio would escape. When the final killing formation was laid out, there would no longer be any way out. If Qin Mu and the rest moved, they would die. If they didn't move, they would also die. Qin Mu chose to stand in his stop. He raised his brush and splashed some ink, then began painting with quick strokes. Stone pillars continuously closed in on them, and the formation changed continuously. Finally, it came right to where they were. When it evolved until its final stage, it became 6 walls which came squeezing toward the center. The 6-sided stone walls continuously pushed forward while giving off loud booms. Finally, the 6 walls collided and immense power burst forth. The formations on the outer layer activated, and the runes on the countless stone cubes lighted up, giving the 6 walls terrifying crushing force. The whole cubic Bamboo City trembled from the collision. Such a strike would it make it hard even for experts of Divine Bridge Realm to escape death, let alone someone like Qin Mu, or the Dragon Qilin. Great, truly superb. Yu Buchuan clapped his hands and laughed. Formation Master is still Formation Master after all. This formation is truly unrivaled in the world and no one is a match for it. Despite Heavenly Devil Cult Master being full of tricks, he could do nothing against Formation Master's formations. He died without any grudge. A woman's voice answered him with insipidness. Young Master, you flatters me. I've heard that this Cult Master Qin had once fought with Poison Master Muing Xue, who is quite arrogant, but had lost to him. This shows that there's something extraordinary about him, but he focused too much on poison and his attainments in algebra and formations are far inferior to mine. I was matching against someone who was inferior to me, so I was able to trap them. Cult Master had no choice but to offer up his head and be executed. Yu Buchuan laughed loudly. He thought Bamboo City could only defeat him with brute force, so he rushed in to show off his impressive skills, but he didn't expect that it was merely a bait set up by Formation Master, and ended up in the trap. Formation Master, Poison Master, and Sword Master are the 3 absolutes of our West Earth, and you are all truly extraordinary. Formation Master, please undo this formation. I want to take a look at the painting Cult Master Qin left for me. The sound of swords clashing rang out, and the huge formation of Bamboo City gradually unwound itself. Chunks of huge stone sank into the ground, and the houses and palaces slowly rose from the ground. Not long later, Bamboo City recovered back to normal and a wall stood where Qin Mu and the rest had been stuck. A painting was hanging there. Yu Buchuan had a smile on his face as he sat on the carriage which drove toward the wall. Behind him followed a crowd of experts from West Earth. There were about 100 of them, and in the lead was a woman. She had a delicate and pretty appearance, and there was a metal cube in her hands. It broke down and turned into metal cubes of all sizes. They then rattled and merged together. The woman was Formation Master He of West Earth, a person who was as famous as Poison Master Muing Xue and Sword Master Luo Yinyu. The three masters of West Earth were all girls, and they all had their unique ultimate arts, which allowed them to set up an independent regime. Formation Master He ruled Bamboo City, and had become famous with her formation skills, which were unrivaled in West Earth. No one was a match for her in formation skills. Even though True Heaven Palace was the sacred ground of West Earth, the three masters had their strong point and weren't subordinate to anyone. However, due to the power of True Heaven Palace, the three masters were slightly fearful of it. If the sacred ground had any requests, they would help. Behind He were the experts of Bamboo City. They were the heads of all the influential families in Bamboo City, and their abilities were strong, much stronger than those of people in Fragrant Bloom City. To be able to set up an independent regime, they were naturally no small fries. Yu Buchuan drove the carriage next to the stone wall. He examined the painting and saw within it were Qin Mu, the dragon Qilin, and Xiong Chia. They looked remarkably realistic, vivid and lifelike. Yu Buchuan was full of smiles as he laughed to the female disciples of True Heaven Palace. Truly vivid and lifelike. Cult Master Qin's painting is really superb. If he sold paintings, he could be adequately provided. Ha 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 ha. The women in the carriage laughed. It's a pity he's dead. Young master, take a look, Cult Master Qin is still smiling in the painting. Another female of True Heaven Palace smiled and said, to die in the hands of Formation Master, after seeing her perfect formation, this should deserve a smile of no regrets, right? Yu Buchuan laughed loudly and got out of the carriage. With his hands behind his back, he examined the painting on the stone wall. He then said leisurely, Cult Master Qin, let's chat for a bit. Great. Qin Mu in the painting suddenly turned his head around and grinned. I was also thinking of chatting with senior brother Yu. Sword treading mountains and river. This video will end here.